Hey, buddy, watch this.
Hello, RegisKillbin is the name and Hearthstone is the game, and this is my 5th custom card review where you guys submitted a ton of custom secrets for classes that otherwise don't have secrets. I narrowed it from 260 cards down to my top 10, and we're going to talk about each of them in detail today. Now, I will be a little shorter than usual when discussing these just because I'm on a little bit of a time crunch right now, but I still want to spend some time with each of them, so let's go ahead and jump into the cards. Now, before I do jump into this first card, I want to talk about one thing, which is that when it comes to custom secrets, you have to kind of take this leap of faith and just assume that other secrets would exist for this given class and that they would be compellingly confusing or hard to play around, or they would have interactions with one another in an interesting way. Some people got really hung up on that in the submission process. I'm sorry for that. It's just one of those things that, you have to make some assumptions and take some things for granted in order to enable a cool design. And you'll see with these cards, it doesn't really matter necessarily if you know what the other secrets for any given class are. They can still work, they can still be intriguing, and they can still be difficult to play around in certain ways. That said, with our first secret here, we have Parry from A Mage Old as Dirt. This would be a 1-mana warrior secret. It reads, whenever an enemy attacks your hero, activate your weapon until the end of turn. And this is a neat mechanic that doesn't get explored very often in Hearthstone, but anytime it's your opponent's turn, your weapon sheathes itself. It gets this cover over it, so it doesn't do damage when a minion attacks your face. The weapon is covered up. There's no attack value to it. Now, that can change with things like misdirection. If a minion misdirects into your face on your own turn, it will damage itself via your weapon because your weapon is not sheathed. Parry would essentially take advantage of that mechanic, unsheathing your weapon during your opponent's turn. So as soon as a minion attacked, your weapon would unsheath itself, and therefore you'd essentially be doing counter damage to anything that attacked you. So if you had, say, a Fiery War Axe equipped and a Flame Imp attacked you, you would do 3 damage to that Flame Imp, killing it. You would do 3 damage to the Happy Ghoul, killing it. Now, you would still take damage from those interactions because it's a trade, right? You each hit each other. So it's not this like immunity, but it is this sort of built-in AoE. And it creates this neat opportunity for your opponent where, first off, they can choose to not attack into parry and maybe clear your board instead if they don't have a board that's ready to deal with that, or if they want you to utilize your weapon charge first, create some friction there, like, because he got to use his weapon, otherwise I'm going to build too big of a board if I go now versus if I go later. Beyond that, they can attack with 1 minion, then use the rest to clear the board once they see parry. They might even choose to attack through the parry anyway, simply because they're going to kill you. They have lethal on board. They don't care if their minions die. So it creates a lot of interesting interactions right off the bat, just from a 1-mana card. And you have to have a weapon equipped for this to make sense, right? So if you don't have a weapon, parry is wasted. There's a lot of different layers to this, which I think is right for a secret. That's a really cool design. Also, the artwork and the name here are absolutely fantastic. Captures it perfectly. I love this artwork choice. So Parry is really well designed, both from a fantasy theme standpoint, but also from an execution standpoint. I really like how the mechanics are expressed in this card as well. Up next here, we have Divine Intervention from Plays Cake, a 2-mana priest secret that reads, at the start of your turn, double the health of all minions. And with this one, it's a secret that's not the traditional secret build, which can only be activated on your opponent's turn, but more similar to something we saw in the past with Competitive Spirit for Paladin, where it's a secret that benefits if your opponent doesn't really do something during their turn, which is to say, clear your minions. So with Competitive Spirit, if your opponent left minions on board, you'd get this nice +1/+1 buff on all of your stuff. With Divine Intervention, it's not a +1/+1, but it's perhaps an even more interesting buff, which is doubling the health. So whereas Competitive Spirit was really best with wide boards, Divine Intervention is the sort of secret that would be much, much better with tall boards, and those are, of course, well utilized by Priest, not only because of things like Divine Spirit and Inner Fire combos, also just because the more health Priest minions have, the more often they're able to utilize their hero power or big heals like Circle of Healing or value trading. So Priest just synergizes incredibly well with high health stuff. And Divine Intervention creates this interesting moment where you punish your opponent if they don't handle things in a certain way. And in fact, when your opponent knows that Divine Intervention is a possibility, they may have to take, you know, unfavorable trades into stuff just to keep the health total in check. So for instance, if you have a 4/7 Twilight Drake on board, your opponent can only do 5 damage to it. They're not going to be able to kill it, but they might still have to do that 5 damage just so that it doesn't get to 14 health. It only goes down up to 4 health when that Divine Intervention triggers. And I really like the way that creates friction. And again, with a card like this, it can backfire big time, right? It can fail hugely if you just have, you know, maybe a Firefly or a Northshire Cleric on board. That's not going to be a big payoff for Divine Intervention. Be okay. It'd be, you know, an uncontrolled Divine Spirit. But if you get bigger stuff, you get 2 or 3 minions, suddenly the potential for Divine Intervention starts to snowball in a really cool way. So I like that for both sides of this one, for the person playing it and for the person playing against it, it creates some strategic moments and some big decisions. I think it's a fair effect for its mana cost. It's essentially Divine Spirit, but without control and with some downside, with some upsides too, of course, but I think it's all balanced out there. So for me, Divine Intervention would be a great expression of a priest secret that synergizes really well with the class, has some cool playable potential, but it's something that your opponent can still address and deal with. It's not stupidly overpowered or anything like that. So I really like this design. Up next here, we have Elemental Chains, a shaman secret from Shaman Plays. And this one will be 1 mana as well. And this secret reads, when your opponent spends all their mana crystals, give them Overload 2 next turn. And I love that this design takes Overload, a shaman mechanic, and it pushes it on to your opponent. And it has a really cool trigger as well. This isn't a trigger we've seen before, that your opponent has to spend all of their mana crystals in a given turn. So it is something that they can play around. They, you know, could float a mana at any given point, but sometimes that's hard to do. And it again creates a really nice decision space where it's like, okay, I need to play this 5-drop, I need Giggling Inventor, but I don't want to be overloaded next turn. Do I have to eat the overload? Is the, you know, is the Nourish now worth it if I'm overloaded next turn? And there's all these moments where it's like, okay, I got to figure this out. I got to plan ahead. And it's something that shaman players are used to with overload, planning ahead for those overload turns. And then suddenly it's flipped where now the other player who may not be used to thinking about that, certainly doesn't think about overload in their whatever other class's deck, suddenly has to start planning ahead and figuring out, is this the secret? What if it's not this secret? They're making me float a mana. And that's what's so cool about Elemental Chains. You're spending 1 mana to penalize your opponent for 2. So, you know, it's not like it's a free 2 mana punishment for them. You are spending a little bit yourself. Also, it's the sort of thing that might just sit there for a while, might never be activated. So there's some real downsides to playing this, but when it works really well because you do steal some mana from your opponent on a future turn. And even if it doesn't work directly, it might create a lot of friction and bad decisions from your opponent. So it still influences them in a negative way just by existing. And I think that's a really cool secret. I don't know what kind of other shaman secrets would exist alongside this one. They may not be related to mana, but if they were, it could create all kinds of silliness and fun for figuring out how to play around this thing successfully, finding the right moment to activate it and trigger it, and finding the right moment for the shaman to play this. Not to mention the name Elemental Chains is a fantastic name, like you're chaining your opponent, and the artwork matches up really nicely as well. So all around, just a nicely made card. Moving on here, we have Human Shield from PVT, another warrior secret, and this one also happens to be 1 mana, pretty popular secret cost for these cards, I have to say. With Human Shield, it reads, when a friendly minion is attacked, gain armor equal to its health. So we have, you know, sort of a Venom Strike trap or Snake Trap or Noble Sacrifice sort of effect here when a friendly minion's attacked. But instead of impacting the board directly like those cards do, this one is just a way to gain some health. And of course, you know, if that's a 1/1 they're attacking, you're pretty sad that you only got 1 armor for 1 mana. That would be a really bad play. But you know what? If that minion has 8 health, 10 health, even 5, 6, 7 health, suddenly a 1 mana gain 6 armor might be really impactful. That could be a big deal. It could be a life-saving sort of play. The downside to a card like Human Shield, of course, is that if you're playing this against an aggressive deck, well, guess what? They don't have to attack minions necessarily, and you're trying to gain life, you're trying to stay alive, and they just ignore your minions. But, of course, what fixes that? Taunt! Taunt fixes that. So Taunt in combination with Human Shield looks really, really good, right? You plop down your Direhorn Hatchling, you play a human shield behind it, and boom, you gain 6 health for 1 mana. Now, Ironhide is a card that's, you know, gain 5 armor for 1 health. That's instant, and that's not a particularly great card. So Human Shield is very close to being a bad card in a lot of ways, which, by the way, is not necessarily a death knell for a card on this list. It's okay if the card is underpowered as long as it's well designed. This very much feels like the sort of card that Blizzard would make. I don't think its power level is off the chart by any means. I think the deck would have to be built very specifically to support it. This is probably better off card generation effects as opposed to being a card you'd actually run in a deck list. But particularly if there are other secrets that synergize with this one or have some sort of high friction moment where your opponent can't figure out what to do, that could make Human Shield better. Also, just attack with big high health taunts could utilize this very successfully as well. And then when it comes to a theme standpoint, Human Shield is perfectly named because you're basically hiding behind a dude. As long as they're attacking that dude, you're not taking that damage. So it feels appropriate from a warrior, you know, shield standpoint, but the name, the artwork, all of it lines up nicely. So PVT nailed this one. I really like Human Shield. It feels like a real Hearthstone card. So up next here we have another Priest secret from Synth and Lasers. 3 mana, it's called Hush. I said that a little loud for a hush. 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 But this secret reads, when your opponent plays a minion, prevent the battle cry, then silence it. So really cool card here, a battle cry intervention effect, which is something we really have not seen so far in Hearthstone, other than things like Dirty Rat, which pull battle cry minions out of hand. A card that cancels a battle cry. I really, really like this because there are so many dominant battle cries in Hearthstone. You know, Shutterwalk is the first thing that comes to mind. These crazy combo decks that are driven by battle cries. Hush gives you a way to interrupt and counter those sorts of decks. So suddenly Shutterwalk doesn't go off, it just hits the board as a 6/6. And yes, it's true that if this were to become a popular meta inclusion as a tech card, most people would probably figure out exactly when Hush was in play, and they would be like, oh gosh, I'm not going to play Shutterwalk into that secret, I know it's Hush. But even that alone is still potentially enough reason to run this card. Because you know what, if your opponent's going into what you presume to be a Shutterwalk turn, you can slam a Hush, and then they have to wait a turn to play their Shutterwalk. They have to play something else. It slows them down, it stalls them. Maybe you can play a second Hush to stall their turn again. Maybe they don't have another minion. Maybe you play this on turn 5 to kill another battle cry. Maybe you play it going into turn 4 to beat the Serenite Chain Gang or Life Drinker instead, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be the one big thing. It can still work in the middle of the game to negate some really powerful battle cries. I mean, think about Giggling Inventor, for goodness sake. That could be a huge gain if you stop the 1/1s from being summoned. Quest Rogue, there's all kinds of decks with ridiculous battle cries. So I love the idea here that Hush not only cancels a battle cry, but also silences a minion too. So even if it doesn't have a battle cry, you still silence a minion too. So even if they play just Tyrion Fordring, it gets silenced even if the battle cry isn't there and doesn't get canceled. So there are essentially 2 different ways for this card to operate. Now beyond that, the name is just fantastic because with silence, of course, you're silencing a minion, but also battle cries are, you know, based on the name, some sort of vocal cry from the opponent or from the minion when it's being played. So Hush is both silencing it, but it's also stopping it from yelling or crying out or, you know, issuing its battle cry. So the artwork is fantastic too, and I think maybe that finger was photoshopped on there. I don't know. That doesn't look like the original artwork to me. So good job, Synth and Lasers, if you took the time to Photoshop that finger. But it looks really, really good, and I like the name. Now, the cost might be just a tad high in my mind. I think you could almost get by at this with this at 2 mana, but 3 is fine for me. I think that's a fair and balanced amount that, frankly, Blizzard looks like they'd utilize too. I think they would probably land a card like this at 3 mana. And we did have quite a few secrets that utilized a similar idea to this one, basically canceling a battle cry. But I thought this one, from a name standpoint, just execution of the card design, came across the best compared to the, you know, similar cards out there. So I chose Hush amongst a lot of other cards that did the exact same sort of thing, just because I thought it looked like the best theme and fantasy and name essentially out of all the options. And I really do think this is a neat card. Up next here we have Recycled Mana for Druid, a 3 mana secret once again. This one reads, if your opponent ended their turn with leftover mana, you may use it on your next turn. So with recycled mana, this is a bit like elemental chains that we saw previously, where it's a mana manipulation one, but instead of your opponent spending all their mana, this one punishes them if they actually float any mana. So if they leave over 1 or 2 mana, suddenly you get to utilize that on your turn. And clearly there's a kind of a tipping point here, right? Where I spent 3 mana, I would hope to get at least 3 mana back on a future turn. Surely that would be the best thing I could do. If I get 1 or 2 mana back, well, that's not very useful. Now, you are guaranteed to get at least 1 mana, remember, because this doesn't trigger unless they have leftover mana. If they had 0 leftover mana, this wouldn't go off because it says if they ended with leftover mana. So you're guaranteed to get at least 1. So you might say, well, most of the time recycled mana is going to be bad because you're only going to get 1 mana and you spent 3 to do it. And you know what? You might be right. A lot of the time this could be bad, but also keep in mind that sometimes if you're trying to set up something like a combo turn or trying to do something unfair that requires a big amount of mana, recycled mana might be one of the only ways you get there to do that. So you could play this, you know, going into just a random turn 10 where you want to set up some Malygos combo or crazy Forbidden Flute combo, and you hope that your opponent gives you 2 to 3 mana extra so that you can do something that would otherwise be impossible. Maybe just that 1 mana extra is enough so that you can get to 12 mana and do some crazy thing with Innervates, or 13 mana with Innervates, whatever it might be. I don't know what exactly it looks like, but that's why I like recycled mana. Not a card that's great all of the time, but situationally, with setup, with interesting moments, it could be good. But you still give the opponent some opportunity to play around this. They can, if they're able to, spend all their mana or give you as little leftover mana as possible. So it creates interesting math, strategic back and forths between you and your opponent. And that's a really fun card that I don't think would be busted for Druid all of the time. Sure, you could slot this into occasional turns and hope to gain a little ramp advantage here and there, but I don't think you'd want to use this just in an average Druid deck. It would have to be very, very situational and dedicated in its use. So I like that. And by the way, the artwork and the name are both fantastic here too. So beyond the mechanics, this is just a well-executed card from a design standpoint as well. Up next here, we have Totemic Backlash for Shaman, another 1 mana secret. And this one reads, when a friendly totem dies, summon all 4 basic totems. So you punish your opponent in a huge way. They kill one of your totems. Boom, all 4 of your basic totems are resummoned. And this has an overload of 2, making it cost a total of 3 mana. Now that's a pretty efficient cost basis for 4 distinct minions that all have positive effects. You'd be pretty happy to spend 3 mana and summon 4 totems, but of course it is conditional. Your opponent has a little bit of initiative because as a secret, this would only activate on your opponent's turn unless stated otherwise, so they could kill a totem and then react to the totems being resummoned. That can be both good and bad because, you know, you could have a taunt totem that forces them to kill it, summon another taunt totem that stalls them out, protects your resources, creates problems and awkwardness for them. Beyond that, it's also, you know, if you surprise them, and we have to, again, just assume and take for granted that there would be other secrets that would create moments where this was a surprise or created a lot of friction or awkwardness. If that's the scenario and you get to stick a few totems coming back into your turn, you've done something which other totem shaman cards have not been able to do so far, which is front load the cost for summoning totems successfully so that you can use things like maybe Windshear Stormcaller or even maybe Totemic Might. I doubt that would still be relevant, but maybe this is enough to help support a totem archetype so you can slam that Kobold Hermit in a Windshear Stormcaller and do something amazing, right? Will it be enough? Probably not, because Totem Shaman sucks, but I like the idea that supporting cards out there could exist, and this would be a fun way to do it so that you spend the mana ahead of time. It makes that Windshear Stormcaller turn less expensive, less awkward, so there's more support. Just another card feeding into that failed archetype, to me, is promising. Again, there's probably not enough one card in the world that could do to flip that deck from bad to good, but I like the idea here. The name is great. I like supporting totem stuff in Shaman. It connects so much to the core of the class. So to me, this card looks pretty cool. So up next here, we have Feral Instincts on the Druid Secret from Nutter666. This one's at 3 mana, and it reads, choose 1. So this is like a secret nested within a secret, which I like a lot. That's really cool. And it reads, when your hero is attacked, shapeshift into bear form or cat form. And just for the record, that doesn't mean that your hero is shape-shifting necessarily. It means this secret is essentially shape-shifting. You're picking which of these you want to be, which of these you want the secret to be. The wording might be a little bit awkward, but you'll see what it means when you read these. So bear form reads, it's a secret that says when your hero is attacked, gain 4 attack and 4 armor. And then cat form, when your hero's attack, gain 2 attack, and then you gain stealth until the start of your next turn. So with instance number 1, again, like we saw with Parry, because your hero is being attacked, when it gains attack, that means it's doing damage to the thing that's attacking it for the rest of the turn. So with bear form, it gains a little bit of life. It also gains this 4 damage output to anything that attacks it. So if your opponent attacks with a minion, much like Parry, they're going to be punished pretty hard because everything on their board, if they attack with it, is going to take 4 damage, including the hero if they use a weapon to attack. And that could be a board clear in essence, right? It's like a 4 damage AoE to their entire board that also gives you at least a little bit of life gain with the 4 armor. And those are, of course, the same stats as bite, which I think is cool. And then we also have cat form here, the alternative. This one you gain 2 attack. So the same thing happens where you can attack the minion that's attacking you, sort of do a return kill. But also it reads you gain stealth until the start of your next turn, so they can only attack you once. So it doesn't serve as the same sort of board clear that bear form would, where you attack multiple things and try to wipe the board. It's more like you attack a single thing defensively. I should really say trade into a single thing defensively, and then you gain stealth, so it's got a little bit of a built-in evasion aspect to it as well, where that's the only instance of damage you take. So ultimately, in either case, you do end up with a lot of value for 3 mana. Bear form and cat form can both essentially shut out a turn from your opponent and create a lot of problems for them and make them do things they don't want to do, sacrificing minions or losing a ton of damage. And it's a big decision which you pick, right? With cat form, it's like if you're more desperate to stay alive right now, cat form might be what you need. So you stay stealth and you try to stay alive into your next turn and you swing it there somehow. Bear form, if you've got a lot of life to work with, if you're just looking to address your opponent's board or stall them out, it could work as well. But the thing is, you got to decide ahead of time, right? Because when are you going to be attacked? Are you going to be attacked next turn? What is their board going to look like? How scary is it going to be? Do they have charge damage in hand? Do I need stealth? Do I not have to account for the Soulfires and Leroy in hand? Can I go for a board clear and stabilize next turn? And then also your opponent has to make a decision not knowing what they're going to see until it's done. Are they a cat or are they a bear? They might guess that it's Feral Instincts, might be a totally different secret. So there's just layers upon layers of decisions that have to be made here by both players, and I think that's really cool. And not to mention, this is just a druid thing transforming into a bear or a cat. We've seen it before with Druid of the Claw, and you'll note that this artwork looks a little bit familiar for the 2 sub-card secrets here for Druid of the Claw, which I think is fine. It reflects back to other druid cards. That's totally cool. The Feral Instincts artwork itself, by the way, awesome, really cool choice there. That looks fantastic. So to me, this captures what Druid is all about with the choose one aspects. It creates interesting moments for both players, all of which is what a secret should do. So all told, Feral Instincts feels like a really nicely made Druid secret to me. So up next here, we have our first Warlock card. There's one more at the end of the video. I don't know why I saved those for last. That was an accident. But this is Hellish Rebuke from Iron Shadow. 4 mana secret, so pretty expensive for a secret here. I like that. And this reads, after your hero takes damage, deal that much damage to all minions. So first things first, again, unless the secret specifies otherwise, it is only activated on your opponent's turn, so you can't like life tap with Hellish Rebuke or play a Flame Imp or some other self-damage activator and utilize that as a board clear. This has to be damage dealt to you from your opponent. So again, we create a situation where if your opponent doesn't handle things correctly and they attack you with the wrong minion or the wrong sort of board state, suddenly, guess what? Boom, their entire board blows up. So they have to attack in an order that makes sense. And what that means for Hellish Rebuke is, it could be terrible. It could be a Firefly attack that only does 1 damage to the board, and that's super depressing, and you didn't get what you wanted. If they have only big stuff out, you could wipe an entire board with a single 4 mana secret. And that's what makes this card cool, right? It's better in certain situations, certain matchups, so you have to find the right time to play it. Your opponent still has to figure out how to play around this thing successfully. Again, we're just going to assume, take it for granted, that there are other Warlock secrets that might add some confusion and layers of depth to the strategic decisions here, might create tactical missteps, might make them fall into a Hellish Rebuke that they otherwise wouldn't want to do. So, you know, against an even Warlock, for instance, imagine this thing hitting Fel Reavers, you know, for 7 damage and wiping out their giant board of stuff. That would be amazing if you could kill a couple Fel Reavers in a Dread Infernal for 4 mana. That's an insanely good removal card, but you know, you had to take 7 damage in the process too, so it's not like this is without its own risk or problems. Might be decent against smaller boards like Zoo 2 in a pinch. You know, it serves to kill some 3 health stuff if a Flame Imp hits you, for instance. There's a lot of 3/3s in Zoo. So I think this has applications across the board when it comes to removal. There's just some downside and some risk to it. Now, also keep in mind that this does say all minions, so it does potentially hurt your own stuff, which is another potential problem for Hellish Rebuke, but all of that fits the Warlock theme in Fantasy perfectly. That helps keep this card balanced from being totally OP. Also note that a lot of the times, because of the way that minion attacks and I guess I should say minion health and attacks are balanced, you know, there's a lot of things that are symmetrical. There's 8/8s, 7/7s, 6/6s. Most of the time, a single minion might die to this, like a Fel Reaver or Lich King attacking into this is going to kill itself, right? I see Fel Reaver all the time. Hooked Reaver. A Hooked Reaver attacking into this is gonna kill itself, right? And that might be enough. Maybe a single minion being killed for 4 mana is great. Anything else is upside. Also note that spells like Fireball going face, for instance, have a lot more downsides. If your opponent wants to attack with a couple small minions in Tempo Mage and then Frostbolt you or Fireball you, they have to be really careful about the order there to make sure they don't inadvertently wipe their minions first. And again, maybe there are secrets that cause problems with that logic. We don't know, but certainly there could be. So that's what makes Hellish Rebuke so fun, not to mention the name and artwork are both perfect for Warlock. So across the board, a really well-designed card here, and one I think would be a good fit for the class. And then finally, one last Warlock card here. This is Bloodboom. That is not a typo. It is, in fact, a brilliant name. It's not Bloodbloom. It's Bloodboom, a 2-mana secret for Warlock. Great artwork choice here to fit the name. This guy's looks like his heart, you know, is exploding basically out of his chest. This secret reads, oh, and this is from Echo Crescent, by the way. This secret reads, when your opponent casts a spell, it costs health instead of mana. So it's much like Bloodbloom in its effect, but because it's a surprise to your opponent, it's more of a blood boom than a blood bloom. I know that might seem like a little bit of a cop-out on a name, but I actually think it's brilliant, and I think it's something that Blizzard would do too, just because it's so tongue-in-cheek. But beyond that, I really like the mechanic here as well. And we should talk about how this would work, because with a card like Blood Bloom right now, if you don't have the health, you're not able to cast the spell. Now, I don't think that would be the case with Blood Bloom just because the way the interactions would work. I think with Blood Bloom that it would cast anyway, and it would kill your opponent if they tried, you know, if they had, for say, instance, 5 health and they tried to cast a 6-mana spell. I think that would kill the opponent because this is a secret. It wouldn't activate until it was already cast. So they'd spend, you know, 6 mana casting their spell. They would take 6 damage. They would, of course, theoretically still have the 6 mana remaining, but they'd be dead, so it wouldn't matter. So alternatively, if they were at 10 health and they cast a 6 mana spell, they would go down to 4 health, but still have 10 mana remaining if they had 10 mana to start the turn. So it would just cost them health and they'd retain any mana. So essentially you're giving your opponent a free spell cast, right? They're getting a cast for free from a mana standpoint, so they could have a pretty powerful turn if they want, right? You could give a druid a free ultimate infestation, and a druid probably doesn't care about 10 health. That's really, really scary. But you also create potentially some interesting moments where they might kill themselves inadvertently. And again, presuming this is actually a secret and there are other secrets that might be run alongside it, that could be a real moment where they have to take a decision. They have to make a choice. Can I cast this spell? I need to flame strike this board, but I only have 6 health. My God, what do I do? And that's super fun. That's exactly what secrets are all about. And those big moments, those big decisions, testing it, figuring it out. You could also get punished with a card like this. You know, if they have a 0 mana spell, a backstab, or whatever it is, it's not going to matter at all. You could get punished, frankly, if they just want to save the mana and have the health too. So some real downsides and upsides to this card, but that's what makes it so good. That's what makes it a fun and unique mechanic and reflects something Warlock already does really well, but inflicts it on their opponent instead. And that is just an awesome design in my mind. And that's why this is one of my favorite cards in this review, I think. I really like what Bloodboom's about. This is a great design, so thank you, Echo Crescent, for submitting this awfully cool one. And that said, guys, that wraps it up for part 5 of my custom card review. We had a lot of cool stuff there, some neat submissions. And again, like I always say, there were probably 50 awesome cards submitted. It's really hard to narrow down the list in my top 10. Don't feel bad if you didn't make the cut. I just have to pick my favorites. You know, a lot of good cards get left out. It's nothing personal. A lot of it just comes down to, you know, instincts and like just, you know, artwork that hits me the right way or a name that just strikes me for whatever reason. So it's not necessarily, you know, an indictment or a condemnation of your card. It's just how it works out with something like this. So I'm going to post the full list of all the cards submitted in the description below, so your card can still get some love from the community. If you want to share it or advertise it in the comments, feel free to do that. I'm sure people will give you some great feedback and some thoughts. Beyond that, we also have custom card review number 6 coming up. So of course I'm going to give you the details there. The form to submit those cards will also be in the description below. And this time around, I want you to make a weapon, any weapon for any class. It doesn't have to be a traditional weapon class. It can be legendary, it could be common, it could be a shield with no attack, it could, you know, have 40 attack, I don't care. Just something that's balanced and cool and creative, you know, probably bonus points if it's based on a weapon from World of Warcraft. Not all of them have to be, but that's probably going to get my eye, that sort of thing. Just a unique, cool effect, whatever you think it might be, whatever's balanced, fits the game, doesn't matter. Any kind of weapon for any kind of class, that is the only rule for custom card review number 6. And again, the link to submit that will be in the description below. So that said, I think that wraps it up for all of the administrative side of things. I hope you had fun with this review. Of course, share your thoughts and comments on these cards in the comments below. You guys have lots of great insights. You show me all kinds of things I missed and you know, ways these are going to be ridiculously broken. I'm always curious to hear that. So I look forward to that. But until then, everybody, thank you so very much for watching. And until next time, game on.